As of the recording of this video, GM's factories are still shut down in the US due to the United Automobile Workers being on strike going on 2 weeks now. This has in turn led to a production shutdown in Canada from the resulting interruption of the supply chain. It has also led to layoffs at contracted suppliers as well here in the US. Sadly, this is one of the consequences of GM using just-in-time production methods when a strike happens. For some reason, GM manufactures components here in the US, then ships them across the border to Canada to be assembled into vehicles only to ship them back across the border. By doing this, the company's executives put General Motors in a position of weakness that the UAW and auto workers here in the US are trying to exploit. This is when they themselves are not exactly standing on solid ground. Before going any further, I want to make something very clear. I personally believe that the auto workers at GM walking out and going on strike is probably one of the stupidest decisions they could have made right now. Nothing good can or will come from it in the end. In the short term, if they are lucky, they might manage to get a few things. Whatever they do get, it will be used to give them a false sense of security as a result of the perceived victory. General Motors will use the time bought from that to expand manufacturing and the infrastructure for it abroad. At most, they will buy themselves a few years, if that. In the long term, all they will have done is dug their graves and the grave of General Motors being an American company manufacturing vehicles in the United States. Mark my words on this too. It is what will eventually happen. The reason why I know it will is because GM has already been moving in that direction for years now and done so quietly under the radar. After the 2008 bailout of the US auto industry, it has expanded manufacturing operations in China on a massive scale. Even though General Motors claimed this expansion was done to better serve the Chinese market, along with other foreign ones, that was just a cover for the true intentions of it. The eventual shift of the overwhelming majority of US production there. The sad part is, no one really cared to look past the surface of this claim to see it for the bullshit it was and still is today. Anyone who lived through the 1990s and mass offshoring of manufacturing that took place back then should have seen GM's supposed expansion for what it really is. An exit strategy for the majority of its manufacturing capacity here in the US to be shuttered and offshored to China. That is exactly what happened with the majority of this country's manufacturing during Bill Clinton's presidency and fire sale of it to the Chinese Communist Party. Now the auto industry is trying to follow suit and move there. The big three are under the delusion that they can manufacture their vehicles in China or someplace else in the developing world, and consumers here in the US are going to believe they are buying an American car from an American brand that is American made. There are two reasons why they believe they can pull this off too. The first is, GM, Ford, and Chrysler have been selling cars manufactured in Canada and Mexico as American cars for decades now, with people thinking they are. The second, they have witnessed Volvo's success at conning people into believing they are buying a Swedish-engineered and manufactured vehicle from a European automaker when that is no longer the case. These days, Volvo is owned by Geely Holdings, a Chinese auto manufacturer that has moved a substantial amount of the brand's manufacturing to China. It has been selling several models that are manufactured there, here in the US and elsewhere for some time now, with the average consumer clueless to what they are actually buying. A pale Chinese knockoff of what a Swedish car should be, with a long-term quality reflective of this. They are paying top dollar for this privilege too. There is this impression that buying a Volvo these days still means you're going to get a car that can handle a crash like this with your walking away from it, which the Chinese are definitely exploiting. Personally, I don't believe that any current Volvo is capable of surviving something like this. That is not part of being made in China. With seeing Geely Holdings being able to tread on the Volvo name and the perception of it standing for Swedish engineering, quality, and safety, GM's executives believe they can pull off something similar and use consumer ignorance to their advantage, similarly how the Chinese have. They believe that consumers are going to buy GM's brands under the assumption they are American-made because Corvettes and full-size pickups will still be made here. They do not realize that Americans are not quite that stupid. But because they believe it, regardless of the truth of the matter, just like the rest of the big three, they are ready, willing, and raring to go on moving as much of their manufacturing out of the US as they possibly can, as soon as they can. If they could have their way and done it already, they would have. The problem is, there is one hell of a large obstacle that's putting a stop to it at the moment: Donald Trump and his presidency. Trump is pretty much the only thing stopping the automakers from packing up shop and moving the bulk of their manufacturing outside of the US. Both GM and Ford had everything set to go on transitioning to facilities abroad prior to the 2016 presidential election with the expectation of Hillary winning. They knew at most all she would have done in response to plants being closed was pay lip service condemnation to their doing it, nothing more. Then Trump came along, forcing them to hedge their bets just in case he won with statements and campaign promises he made that were directed at the auto industry. Because of him, they chose to wait things out. It is a good thing they did too. If GM hadn't done so, they would have been more than screwed with the company's plans of making China the home for a majority of its global manufacturing. They would have brought their factories up to capacity there, began phasing out and closing U.S. plants, and Trump's tariffs on Chinese-made goods would have gone into effect, pricing them out of the U.S. market. It would have destroyed their ability to sell any vehicles manufactured there here in the United States. With the direction GM has taken, it is not about to stop the eventual shift of manufacturing to facilities outside of North America at this point. The ball is already in motion and rolling towards that end goal. Right now, it has just been put on hold because of Donald Trump being president, whether anyone wants to admit it or not. He is the only thing stopping it and has all the leverage and bargaining power when it comes down to it. No other individual or group comes remotely close to him on this note in comparison. Most of those who think they have any sort of leverage or bargaining power these days over General Motors or the rest of the big three here in the US truly don't have any, not in this age of globalization. The United Automobile Workers, along with its members, are an example of this. They believe that collectively they have actual control and power over the automakers here in the US in the 21st century for some reason. This is when they can easily move their production to the third world and developing nations, and there's nothing the UAW or auto workers can do about it. All they're putting pressure on automakers at this point does is only incentivize their getting the hell out of Dodge, no pun intended. With almost every industry here in the United States, especially those that were unionized, after Clinton opened the doors for manufacturers to head to China, they fled there as fast as they could. Tech, telecommunications, consumer electronics, steel manufacturing, and other industries moved there en masse. Now it is the auto industry trying to do it. Their moving outside the United States, mostly to China, is in large part the result of the constant demands put on them by auto workers and the UAW for more money and benefits that has gone on for more than a few decades now. Not to mention they're holding the big three hostage in order to get it because they were the only game in town at the time. The problem for them today is, and they don't seem to get it, they aren't the only game anymore. Yet they still want to play things like they are. They're doing this. It is one of the major reasons why GM invested all of the money that it did into manufacturing facilities and the infrastructure to support them in China. The United Automobile Workers and its members priced themselves out of the labor market. The only thing at this point keeping them in it and preventing General Motors from shifting the bulk of its production over to its Chinese factories is President Trump at the moment. It is just him doing it. Trump has them cornered with the tariffs he's placed on China and attention on the big three. General Motors has nowhere to go at the moment as a result and is stuck where it is. Because they are stuck, the UAW and its members, employed by GM, decided it would be a good idea to jump into the mix and take swipes at the company and demand more money, thinking they have the upper hand when they don't. What they don't realize is, things are going to get to a point where management is just not going to care anymore and they are going to retaliate. At that point, when it happens, and it will happen with how everyone has their breaking point, it will not end well for the auto workers employed by GM here in the US or the UAW. Never mind the American people who will be hurt by their greed having got the best of them as well. Their intentional antagonizing of General Motors management right now isn't the play they should be making. Having their hands out and demanding more money when they should be happy to be getting paid what they are does not help them with the company or lend them any sympathy from the public with this situation. GM's auto workers are the highest paid in the industry here in the US. Between wages and benefits, they make $65 an hour. That works out to over $135,000 a year that they are getting paid, assuming a 40-hour work week. That kind of money isn't chump change. It isn't close to being slave wages either. I am sure a large segment of the US population would be more than happy to make that kind of money working an assembly line in a factory where machines are doing almost all the heavy lifting and set things up for you. To me, personally, that sounds like relatively easy work to make that kind of money. To put things into perspective a little bit, the auto workers that are putting tires on cars as they move down the assembly line are making $65 an hour to guide a wheel onto wheel studs that a machine is holding for them. Then they put the lug nuts on the studs, take an impact wrench, and tighten them down. That is it. That's all they're doing to make that kind of money. We are talking about less work than what someone working at a local tire shop does for less money, which goes to show how overpaid some auto workers are these days. The whole reason why there are auto workers being overpaid like this is because they and the UAW have been holding the auto industry hostage with a gun to its head for well over 80 years now. Every time they have wanted something, more money, more benefits, guaranteed pay, whatever, they have pressed the barrel up against the heads of management and demanded they get it. The UAW and auto workers doing this over and over has weakened the effects of it, especially over the last couple decades or so with options being opened up for the big three. Automakers here in the US have had more than enough time now to weaken the restraints put on them by auto workers and the UAW. They have scoped out their surroundings and planned their escape. They even went so far as to have contingency plans if something changes for them. They have prepared to make their moves. China was General Motors' move to get away from being held hostage by the UAW and auto workers. Even though Trump is blocking their way, they still have Mexico and Canada as a means of escape. At least a partial one, that is. During the later part of the 20th century, especially after NAFTA and Bill Clinton selling the US out to China, we witnessed the big three export and offshore the production of components, even vehicle manufacturing as well. While this was all going on, instead of looking at what concessions they could make to prevent it from happening, the UAW and its members had their focus on demanding more for themselves. They were watching what was left of Rome burning down around them, well, Detroit in this case, and all they could think of was ransacking and looting the ruins of it. What we are witnessing today with GM and the strike is just more of the same exact bullshit. Nothing has changed with one exception. There is less for them to pillage today than there was before. But they are not going to be satisfied until they have it all, it seems, and by that point it will be too late. Don't get me wrong, unions did serve a purpose at one time here in the United States. The problem is, that time is long past now and gone. Today, they cause more harm than they do actual good. This does not mean that collective bargaining does not have its place, though, because it still does, especially in a free society. Now, I am sure there are some of you saying I'm not a libertarian for saying that. I know it is because you believe that a libertarian wouldn't say what I have about unions once having a place or that collective bargaining still has one. Those of you thinking that, please hear me out. In an ideal world, the market should dictate the price of labor no differently than it does the prices of goods and services. On the same note, there is an obligation for an employer to provide a safe working environment for their employees. The thing is, though, we don't live in an ideal world where the labor market is manipulation-free and employers meet their obligations to their employees. Under those types of circumstances, individual employees should have the freedom to choose to collectively approach their employer together, voice their grievances, and negotiate a reasonable redress for them. No differently, an employer should have the freedom to fire them if they so choose, even if in response to their doing it. Things have gone well past this point today, though. With the auto industry, what started out as auto workers deciding to come together as a group to voice their mutual grievances and trying to have them redressed has turned into a shit show of entitlement. We went from their wanting the market to dictate wages, not a gentleman's agreement between automakers, to their believing that if they feel like they deserve more money, the big three should just hand it over to them regardless of what the market will bear. With the current GM strike taking place, that is exactly what we are seeing. The relationship between the auto industry, the UAW, and auto workers it represents is an example of the abused eventually becoming the abusers. They do not realize that they have become the very thing they were claiming to be fighting against, the exploiters in industry. What is even worse, auto workers and the UAW do not understand that their abuse of the auto industry and attempted extortion of it has far more encompassing and detrimental impact on the country as a whole than the abuse the automakers inflicted on their workers almost a century ago. The UAW and auto workers will never understand that what they've pulled for all these years, such as being on strike right now because $65 an hour in wages and benefits isn't enough compensation for them, is one of the biggest contributing factors to General Motors heavily investing in China. It wasn't the market there that was the driving force for GM doing it, even though China is where they do 45% of their business. Chinese auto sales have reached their peak and flattened out. GM's manufacturing capacity in China far exceeds the demand of the market. It is clearly geared towards supplying a global one. If you do the math, it comes down to the cost of doing business here in the US that drove General Motors' investment in manufacturing there. The UAW and auto workers, with their demands on the big three, along with the labor contracts they negotiated under the barrel of a gun, priced themselves out of the market. They caused it to happen. It is the same exact story as to why the Chevy Blazer is being manufactured in Mexico. General Motors could have easily started production of it at one of the plants they are ceasing production at here in the United States. The executives running the company chose not to do that though, which again comes down to the cost of doing business here in the US for them. If the trade war between China and the US wasn't currently happening, I wouldn't be surprised if General Motors had chosen to produce the Blazer in China instead of Mexico in all honesty. Why pay a Mexican more for the same job when you can pay someone in China even less, right? It only makes sense it would have been a consideration. And the fact that it would have been one, we have the UAW and auto workers to thank for that. I am sure General Motors, like the rest of the big three, believes that transitioning as much of their manufacturing outside the United States as possible will get rid of a lot of their problems. I agree with this too to some extent. The UAW and auto workers are definitely a problem for them, but they have way more problems than just that. General Motors is beyond the point of being out of touch with consumers here in the United States. The same is true with the West in general. Let's just focus on the US right now though. The Chevy Cruze and Volt, for example, two vehicles that GM recently stopped production of, were not created as a result of responding to the market. They were both designed by committee in response to federal mandates regarding fuel economy and hybrids that were imposed on automakers by the Obama administration. Their doing this was never going to be a success for them. They should have realized it from the start, especially after the Pontiac Aztek's failure. It was designed by committee and bombed spectacularly. Because of doing this, at this point, just about the only thing GM has, besides the hype of the new Corvette and their bread and butter truck sales, is name recognition to tread water with. You can only do that for so long before you start to sink and eventually drown, which is exactly what happened to General Motors in 2008. And here we are now, it's over a decade later, and the executives running the company haven't learned a thing. GM is no better off today than it was back then. Because of this, GM has had to resort to buying awards in an attempt to keep itself and its brands relevant. This includes completely made-up ones that have no actual meaning to them. The J.D. Power Awards Chevy and other General Motors brands hold are an example of this. The executives believe having all of these bought and paid for awards will get people to buy vehicles they do not want. This is when it would just be easier to make the ones they actually do. It would almost definitely be cheaper in the long run, too. What General Motors is doing with their paying for these awards, the discontinuing of production of vehicles that consumers didn't want to buy in the first place, the making of those vehicles, it's investing solely in China for its global production, along with the issues it is having with the UAW and US auto workers, not to mention the executives not learning a thing after 2008. It is a company not long for this world unless it changes how it operates. On the same note, if the UAW and auto workers want to keep any sort of employment at GM and the rest of the big three on US soil, they are going to have to change how they operate as well. Both sides are playing chicken with each other. Neither is about to flinch, and the rest of us are stuck in the middle, waiting for the inevitable crash that will happen unless both make a change to the direction they are heading in. Having said all this, I'm going to leave you with a clip from a content creator that I think sums up General Motors, its vehicles, and the awards it has paid for best. His name is Mahk. M-A-H-K, and his channel is Zebra Corner over on YouTube. I have linked it in the description.
Only about 90 more to go.
You know what? Let me give it a shot here.
You ready? Go.
2017 Motor Trend Assault Our Intelligence Award, 2016 J.D. Power Bottom Stupid Idiot Looking Host Award, Kelly Blue Book 2017 Couldn't Afford the Car You Actually Wanted Award, 2015 Least Likely to Win a Race Award, 2016 Award for Most Recalls of a Car, 2015 Biggest Doors Award, Least Likely to Be Stolen Award, not because it's secure but because it's ugly, 2015 Most Likely to Leave You Stranded on the Side of the Road Award, 2015 Award for the Most Fatalities Due to Faulty Ignition Switches, 2008 America Should Have Never Bailed You Out Award, 2009 Award for Most Bankruptcies and Layoffs in a Single Year, At Least It Rolls Downhill in Neutral Award, 2015 Tom Brady Wouldn't Even Take Your Stupid Free Truck Award, 2016 Award for the Most Made Up Awards, 2015 Award for the Most Made Up Awards, 2014 Award for the Most Made Up Awards, Worst Fake Award, the Award for the Worst Award, It's Amazing Your Marketing Team Hasn't Been Fired Yet Award, 2016 J.D. Power Rod Award for the Least Creative, Least Imaginative, Dull, Stale, Tedious, Shallow, Empty, Boring, Condescending, Patronizing, Unfunny, Arrogant, Boastful, braggadocious, asinine, brainwashing, out of touch, worst commercial, brain dead marketing campaign I have ever seen. President of Haverhill High Speed Reading Club. Bet you weren't counting on that, huh?
If you liked this video, depending on where you are watching it, please give it an upvote or thumbs up. If you want to know when new content of mine hits the internet, don't forget to subscribe to one or more of my social media or video accounts listed here. Also, with YouTube, don't forget to ring that bell. You can find all of my video content on both BitChute and YouTube. This may not be the case with other places I upload to, but I will try to minimize this happening. You are always welcome to interact with me at any of these sites on the list, so feel free to do so. If you have anything you want me to cover in a video, when it comes to news or current events, send it right along to me. I will try to do my best to cover it. As always, thank you for watching.